Harris, and I'm the President of the Australia-Africa Chamber of Commerce. I welcome you to this very historic first meeting of Senior Australia Trade and Diplomatic Interests with the head of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat in Ghana. The purpose of this meeting is to establish an initial basis for the collaboration for trade and investment with the Africa Continental Free Trade bloc. This meeting follows a recent one I had in Canberra with the Canberra-based Africa Diplomatic Corps and the follow-up actions by the High Commissioner for Ghana to arrange this meeting. As such, I'm delighted to introduce His Excellency Dr. Karim Medrick, the Ambassador for the Kingdom of Morocco, as Dean of the Corps, to make some opening remarks. Thank you, Your Excellency. You're on mute, sir. You're on mute. Dr. Karim, you're on mute. That's it. Watch it. You're on mute.
Hello, do you hear me?
Yes, thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Okay. I said, first of all, I would like to wish you all the best since it's your birthday today, Mr. Duncan.
Thank you very much.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good evening to all the African heads of mission accredited to Canberra. And good morning to His Excellency, the Secretary General of the African Continental Free Trade Area, Mr. Wamkeli Mini. I am so pleased to welcome you to this Australia and AfCFTA introductory webinar or meeting, which is really an occasion to talk about the promising prospects of this platform, accelerating the intra-African trade and boosting Africa's trading position in the global markets. AfCFTA will strengthen surely the Africa's common voice and policy space in the global trade negotiation, including with various partners such as Australia. For all of us Africans, I think a new bridge on the path of unity and integration of the continent has been achieved. Moreover, this is the culmination of the will of the founding fathers of the Organization of African Unity. This new space offers us the opportunity to transform Africa's raw materials on the spot and accelerate the implementation of an African industrial base to meet the needs of our population. It is first and foremost a space for complementary through the creation of interconnected regional growth poles and a space conducive to comparative advantages, as well as a new utility to regional economic communities and African integration. The AfCFTA is primarily employment opportunities too, for more than 12 million people who join the labor market each year. The AfCFTA will unleash African creative genius, build bridges between regions, and will facilitate the intra-regional trade and will accelerate the integration of regional economic communities. In fact, the scope of this platform is large, and the agreement will reduce tariffs among member countries and will cover policy areas such as trade facilitation and services, as well as the global economy is undergoing a period of uncertainty due to the pandemic, COVID-19. Creation of the vast AfCFTA regional market is, in my point of view, a major opportunity to help African countries to diversify their exports, accelerate growth, and attract foreign direct investment. I think this kind of meeting will be very helpful for all of us here in Australia as representative of our countries, and also for the Secretariat of the African Continental Free Trade area to interact and to bring all our efforts with someone that he has a lot of interest in Africa. And let me now introduce Duncan Harris, for the one who doesn't know a lot about our friend. Mr. Duncan Harris, as you know, is the president of the Australia-Africa Chamber of Commerce, who has a long understanding and interest in bilateral trade and investment with Africa. As a former special advisor to the Commonwealth Business Council in London, Mr. Harris established strong business connection with Africa. And indeed, as the president of the Australia-Africa Chamber of Commerce, he has put the building blocks that will enhance the visibility and importance of this chamber by creating a series of partnerships with major bodies in the public and the private sector. And Mr. Harris, please allow me, on behalf of the African Group of Head of Missions, I would like to seize this occasion to congratulate you for the excellent work being done so far by the Chamber to fulfill trade and economic rapprochement between Africa and Australia. And now I am pleased to give you the floor, Mr. Harris, to introduce partners, participants, and the Australian African Chamber of Commerce, the one who are present with us. Thank you, Mr. Duncan.
Well, Your Excellency, thank you for those kind words about myself and the Chamber. But we try to believe we bring together what I call Team Australia approach in all of this. To that extent, I'd like to, if I may, introduce the following persons who will participate in the discussions today. They are from, obviously, from the Australia-Africa Chamber of Commerce, from Austrade, and from the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. May I first introduce Laisa Issa Obidi. Elisa is a committee member of the AACC and the head of strategy for us. Ian Halliday is Australia's Consul General in Dubai and the General Manager, Middle East, Africa and Turkey for Austrade. Scott Morris is the Senior Trade Commissioner, Africa for Austrade, to be shortly based in Joburg in about 2 weeks' time, in fact. David Gayer is very important in the sense he's the Acting Assistant Secretary, Africa Branch with the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. Each of us look forward to both participating and contributing to the discussions that follow. Thank you, Your Excellency. We look forward to a very stimulating meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I am now pleased to introduce our guest tonight, Mr. Wamkele Mini, the first Secretary General of the African Continental Free Trade Area, who has previously served as the head of mission to the World Trade Organization for South Africa, as well as the chair of the Committee on International Trade in Financial Services and at the WTO. Mr. Mini was also the Chief Director for Africa Economic Relations in South Africa Departments of Trade and Industry, and has been South Africa lead negotiator for the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. Mr. Mini, once again, in my capacity as Dean of the African Group of Head of Mission in Australia, I extend our sincere thankfulness to Your Excellency for joining us tonight. The floor is yours, Excellency.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, Your Excellency. It's a pleasure for me to join you and the other ambassadors of the Africa Group in Australia. I want to thank also the Chamber of Commerce for co-convening this event and inviting me in particular, as well as, of course, the government of Australia and all the partners that have been involved in convening this meeting. Since my election by the Assembly of Heads of States last February, this is the first time that I am having an interaction with Australia. And so thank you for facilitating this. I suspect that the Chief of Staff of the AfCFTA Secretary General's office had something to do with it. He has a bias towards Australia. He studied in Australia. And so I suspect that there is a bias there. I think, Your Excellency, I heard your remarks about the opportunity for Africa to industrialize through the AfCFTA. And I fully agree with you. And I will set out in a minute how we intend to do that in very, very concrete terms. Let me start by maybe taking one or two steps back, and that would be setting out why the Assembly of Heads of States decided that we need to have a free trade area on the African continent. We have smallness of national economies. We have lack of industrial depth, industrial capacity. We continue as Africa to, for the most part, not all Africans, but many African countries continue to export primary commodities to other countries of the world. We have market fragmentation of rules across regions and across countries. And so when you look at the sum effect of that, the combined effect of that is that intra-Africa trade is a very, very low 18%, particularly when you compare it to intra-European trade, which is at 70%, intra-North America trade, which is at 60%. Africa is at the lower end of intra-regional trade because of some of the factors that I have mentioned. We don't trade amongst one another as African countries in value-added products. Where we do trade, in the small amounts where we do trade, the focus is on apples for apples. There is very little trade specialization that happens today on the African continent, and that is because of the lack of industrial depth and industrial capacity. And 60 years after colonialism, it's difficult to excuse that. And I think our heads of states have been very, very honest with ourselves. They've urged us to be honest with ourselves as Africans and say, do we really have an excuse for continuing to export primary commodities with no value addition over 60 years after the end of colonialism? So that is why we have the African Continental Free Trade Area, because they realized that with 1.2 billion Africans, with a combined GDP of 3.4 trillion United States dollars, which by the year 2015 is projected to be at close to 8 trillion United States dollars combined GDP, certainly we now have a very, very unique opportunity to use the AfCFTA to place Africa on a path on industrial development, value-added production, and manufacturing. establishing regional value chains across the African continent, establishing centers of manufacturing excellence across the African continent is one way in which we can do this. And we don't need a long laundry list of value chains. What we require are 3 or 4 value chains to focus on, leveraging on the reduced tariffs and leveraging on the elimination of non-tariff barriers. Our ambition, which has been adopted by the Assembly of Heads of States, it is now in the modalities of the agreement. Our ambition is that in 14 years' time, 97% of products that are traded on the African continent will be traded at 0 duty. Of course, least developed countries will have a little bit more time. Their transition period will be longer. But at the end of the 13th year, all products that are traded on the African continent, 97% of them will be traded at 0 duty. It's a very, very ambitious objective. It's going to be very difficult, but we are determined to meet this very, very high ambition. And so the establishment of regional value chain and the acceleration of Africa's industrialization is really hinging on the modalities for trade, for tariff reduction and non-tariff barrier reductions that I have just referred to. What is very encouraging is that already you can see that with the onset of COVID-19, some countries, even before the launch of the start of trading on the 1st of January 2021, you can already see that some countries were positioning themselves for acceleration of industrial development. Senegal, for example, has established a special economic zone for pharmaceutical products. Kenya has repurposed many businesses to be able to manufacture the personal protection equipment that is required to fight the pandemic. South Africa and some countries in North Africa are beginning to develop the necessary capacity to manufacture vaccines. There are countries on the African continent who are in the area of automobiles: Morocco, Egypt, Kenya, Ghana, South Africa, Rwanda. These are countries that have an automobile strategy. These are countries that already have positioned themselves quite competitively in the automobile sector. And with the AfCFTA, there will now be those linkages of regional value chains, particularly in the area of automobiles, once again leveraging on the reduced and ultimately to be eliminated tariffs in a range of different components that are required in the auto sector, so that ultimately the auto sector contributes to Africa's industrial development objectives, as well as even the area of pharmaceuticals, so that the pharmaceutical industry also contributes ultimately to Africa's industrialization. These are some of the pockets of success that we have begun to see even before the entry into force and the launching of trading on the 1st of January 2021. And I believe now with the AfCFTA, we will be able to anchor these pockets of success in the trade liberalization that all of us have agreed to. The state of play of the AfCFTA is encouraging. We now have 37 countries who have ratified the agreement. We now have, and of course, it's still 54 countries who have signed the agreement. The negotiations for tariff reduction are advancing. We want to conclude the remainder of the tariff negotiations by the end of June. We are at about 81% concluded. And so, and you know as well as I do, Ambassador, that there is no trade agreement that is ever concluded on time. But if we judge ourselves based on the WTO, I think we are making very, very good progress. If we look at what is happening in the multilateral trading system in terms of timelines for concluding negotiations. So phase two, phase one, which is trading goods, very, very critical. We will conclude by the end of June. That is what the heads of states directed us to do. Phase two of the AfCFTA negotiations is, as you know, investment, competition policy, intellectual property rights, digital trade. And these are very, very important pillars: investment protection, competition policy, intellectual property rights, e-commerce. These are very, very important pillars of a region or a country's economy. And that is why we want to make sure that in tandem with liberalization of trading goods, that we liberalize trade in services, that we harmonize at a high level, we harmonize regulatory frameworks. We don't seek to replace national regulators. National regulators will still be there, but we do think that at a very, very high level, it is possible to agree on principles for regulation of the services sector. We have identified 5 priority sectors for immediate liberalization. And these are financial services, tourism, construction, business services, and so on. These are the sectors that are the backbone of any country's or region's industrialization. So we will start with these 5 priority sectors. After we conclude negotiations on liberalization of these 5 priority sectors, we will then start negotiations on liberalization of the remainder of the services sectors. The baseline for us is WTO commitments. We are not going to start below WTO services commitments, and certainly we will also consider regional services liberalization regimes. But ultimately, we want to be WTO plus. We want to go even beyond the liberalization that we have offered at the level of the WTO itself. And so we have this, once again, I emphasize, a very, very unique opportunity, noting the experience of COVID-19. We have a very unique opportunity to aggressively implement liberalization, implementation of this agreement. And when you look around the world, countries are providing very, very significant economic recovery tools. I think the United States is now close to $10 trillion. The European Union is at about $1,800 billion. Very, very significant stimulus packages to spur on growth and recovery after the onset of COVID-19. Very, very few African countries have the fiscal policy, the monetary policy space to provide such significant bailouts. So for us, implementation aggressively of this agreement is the stimulus package that Africa requires. Boosting intra-Africa trade can be the driver of Africa's recovery and economic recovery year on year from 2022. So it is a very, very important trade instrument that that we have and the opportunity that it presents for Africa to recover, to ensure a fast recovery from COVID-19. Now, of course, there will be challenges. Of course, there will be challenges. We are at differentials in levels of economic development on the African continent. We are at differentials in levels of industrial development capacity. There will be countries who will be immediate beneficiaries of the liberalization of trade because they already have the export capacity. There will be countries who will not be immediate beneficiaries. And we are now actively working with partners such as AfCFTA to see what type of adjustment interventions to cushion the adjustment as countries liberalize their tariffs, reduce their tariffs and eliminate them. Many countries on the African continent rely on tariffs as a revenue generation tool for the fiscus. Ultimately, we want to change that. Tariffs should not ultimately be a tool for revenue generating. Tariffs should be an industrial development tool. So in the long term, we will have to change that posture and move away from the reliance on tariffs. But that can only happen, of course, as we ramp up and improve Africa's industrial development capacity. I already mentioned a few pockets of success around the continent insofar as industrial development is concerned. But of course, it's going to take time. So this challenge of different differentials in industrial development capacity is significant. We will have to confront it, and we will have to make very concrete interventions. The second challenge that we're going to have to confront is the readiness of our customs authorities, the capacity of our customs authorities to implement the agreement. We will have to rely on customs authorities. You know as well as I do, Your Excellency, that without customs authorities who know how to look at the tariff book and apply an AfCFTA tariff book as agreed to by member states and apply the rules of origin as agreed to, if you don't have that capacity, the agreement is not going to be successful in its implementation. We have already been in the 6 months that we have been operational, we have already been in discussions with heads of customs authorities in Africa with a view to designing a capacity development program that will be designed bespoke for AfCFTA implementation. It's going to take time. Many countries have porous borders. We want ultimately every border agent to know that there is an AfCFTA tariff book, and they must know how to apply it when goods are transiting through the border. Very significant challenge. It's going to take a long time. The other challenge, of course, that we are going to have to confront is the harmonization of customs procedures. We have already agreed in the agreement that our customs procedures, our trade facilitation procedures, goods in transit procedures, all have to be harmonized. The next step will be, once again, working with customs authorities to make sure that we implement particularly transit goods annex, trade facilitation annex, customs procedures. We will have a particular challenge to make sure that all of us implement these rules as we have agreed to them in the agreement. The last point I would make in terms of the challenges, at least from my point of view, is on dispute settlement. Yesterday, we opened the inaugural meeting of the dispute settlement body of the WTO. I'm sorry, of the AfCFTA. And when you look at the problems in the WTO, the problems in respect of the appellate body and the way in which it was paralyzed and is no longer able to operate, we looked at that experience. We looked at the experience of other free trade agreements and the dispute settlement mechanisms in those free trade agreements, and we improved We looked at international best practice and we improved on it, which is the result is that is the protocol on dispute settlement that we have today, which we started operationalizing yesterday through the inaugural meeting of the dispute settlement body, which will be the overarching body for dispute settlement resolution in the under the AfCFTA. There will be, of course, countries ultimately, as happens around the world. I am sure that there will be cases of lack of compliance with some of the provisions in the agreement. And so the dispute settlement mechanism really goes to the heart. It goes to the heart of the trade liberalization objectives that we are seeking to achieve on the continent. And so we have designed based, and many of us were in the WTO, we have designed a mechanism that exceeds the expectations of international best practice. Of course, the test will be how we implement it, its implementation, and the fact that we are able to adhere as Africans to the rule of trade law, which all of us in the AfCFTA, all of us have negotiated, all of us have agreed to these rules. 37 countries who have deposited their instruments of ratification have agreed to these rules for resolution of disputes in the AfCFTA. Let me conclude, Your Excellency, by observing the following. This agreement, in my opinion, will position Africa favorably in the long term from an investor sentiment and investor perspective, because we, for the first time in Africa, from Cape to Cairo, from Djibouti to Dakar, we will now have a single set of rules for trade and investment on the African continent. If you have invested in the services sector in East Africa, if you are a bank providing deposit-taking services, commercial banking, you are a foreign bank, you will know how many, a particular on the continent, how many banking licenses are issued to foreign banks. That will be applicable in North Africa, in Southern Africa, in East Africa. So we are creating predictability and certainty of the market. Before entry into force of this agreement, if you wanted to invest in financial services in West Africa, the licensing requirements were different to East Africa and North Africa and so on. We are now harmonizing all of that process so that investors can have a clear sense of what regulations will be applicable to them across the African continent. We are also intending that this agreement should enhance ease of doing business on the African continent. What I've alluded to, the dispute settlement mechanism, is one way in which ultimately you can have recourse as an investor. You can have legal recourse if you suffer injury. You petition your government will espouse your claim, and your claim can be resolved by an impartial, technically competent dispute settlement body. We are also working to make sure that we build a very, very strong partnership with the private sector, because it is the private sector that implements, that creates jobs. It is the private sector that invests in innovation, in research and development. Governments don't create jobs. Governments establish the right environment. And collectively, these 37 countries, through the AfCFTA and the rules in the AfCFTA, they have sought to establish the right environment for investors. The rules of origin, the local content requirements are very, very stringent. Because we want to foster industrialization on the African continent, whether we are talking about the services sector, digital industrialization, or trade in goods. We want to make sure that there is commercial presence commercially meaningful presence on the continent, and that there is production that happens in earnest on the African continent. So it's going to be extremely difficult, this challenge of implementing this agreement. I don't think any of us are under any illusion. It takes time. We know from the experience of Europe that market integration is difficult, is challenging, is time consuming, but the alternative is not to throw our hands in the air and say, oh, it's going to be too difficult, because if we do that, we will retreat back to market fragmentation. We will retreat back to smallness of national economies. We will retreat back to the colonial economic model, which we inherited and sustained, and that is of continuing to export primary commodities and not ever processing and making value addition on the African continent. So I want to thank you very much, Your Excellency, and the Australian Chamber of Commerce and the Government of Australia for arranging this session today. I know that it is the first of many conversations that we should have with Australian investors, and with your presence in Australia, I know that you will be able to facilitate these conversations with potential Australian investors. The African continent is open for business. It is open based on rules for trade and investment, rules that all of us have negotiated and agreed to and ratified in our parliaments. So I want to once again thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Secretary General, for these pertinent remarks and exhaustive presentation. We are so glad that your first interaction with Australia was during this meeting, thanks to this interaction with all our stakeholders here in Australia, with our African group in Canberra. Allow me now, I think, if I may, indeed, the AfCFTA is a real significant achievement for Africa. There is no doubt about it. But we are responsible, I think, in front of the next generation to achieve what was until recently a dream. And now it's become a reality. And we need to be convinced for all of us, even if, as you said, some countries will take advantage earlier than others, because they have more capacity today to face some challenges, but all countries will benefit from this platform. I believe sincerely, and we are convinced, that the AfCFTA will be a win-win process at the end. And our partners, in particular, in our case, for example, Australia, needs to take this momentum too, and to implement a large partnership with Africa. Africa is the future. And I think we need to seize this occasion to consolidate this partnership and to increase interaction with all stakeholders around Australia to explain the benefit they will have from to be present now and not tomorrow in Africa. I think to achieve the full potential of this platform will depend on putting in place significant policy reforms. We need to do, of course, our homeworks in our countries and to put in place trade facilitation measures. The successful implementation will be the key, including the careful monitoring of impacts across all countries, across all sectors, and to ensure the full benefit for all our partners. Thank you again, Secretary General. I would like now, if you allow me, to present you briefly the High Commission and ambassadors present in Canberra who are present tonight. We have the Professor Kikafunda from Uganda. We have Mr. Frank Bwalia from Zambia. We have Mr. Martinus van Schalkwijk from South Africa. We have our colleague Joe Shishi from Zimbabwe. We have our colleague Mahmoud Gamaluddin Zaid from Egypt. We have our colleague Merzak Bilhimer from Algeria. We have Mrs. Dorcas Makatko from Botswana. We have our colleague Marie-Claire Monti from Mauritius, Dr. Joseph Nikofi Agwe from Ghana, and our new colleagues from Kenya, John Tipis, and from Ethiopia, Mukhtar Abdu, and from Nigeria, Bola, Acting High Commissioner, and from Sudan, Ahmed Farah. I will now open the floor. I think after these presentations, different presentations, I think our colleague and the members and our partners from the chamber will have some remarks or some comments to say. Then the floor is yours. Please, if there is anyone who wants to take the floor, is yours. Yes, please.
Do I have the floor?
Yes, Dorcas, go ahead.
Good evening, Your Excellencies.
Good evening.
Thank you very much for a wonderful and comprehensive presentation that we've just had. I look back to 2011 or 2012, 2013, if I'm correct, the inaugural meeting of all the African ministers in South Africa, where we were dealing with this matter at hand as a concept. And today we are talking about a product that's been ratified by a significant number of countries. I've always been concerned about one aspect, and I don't know, maybe you can elaborate on it. To what extent are member countries going to still retain their policy space under infant industry protection? I particularly worry about those small economies that have not developed productive capacity and are not industrialized, because naturally those that are ready, and some of them you've mentioned, they will be ready to go to market when others are still trying to grow. And obviously with economies of scale, they'll never play catch up. So I'm just wondering whether within these agreements, because I haven't seen it yet, because now I'm here, I'm no longer Minister of Trade, that you have retained that to try and protect those that need to grow to be able to compete for the new liberalized policy space at continental level. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We will take another comment or another question before giving back the floor to Mr. Wamkili. Who wants to take the floor, please? Mukhtar, go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you, Your Excellency, Mr. Karim. Thank you for moderating and bringing us together for this very timely agenda of Africa. I have only one question. I'm really grateful to the Secretary General for his wonderful and insightful presentation of this night. My question is, I want to hear from him what he expects from us African ambassadors here in Canberra in really in the process of making this arrangement, trade arrangement, a reality in the continent. So I want to hear from him his expectation from us. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Wamkili, I think you can answer these two questions first. Thank you. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, and thank you, Your Excellencies, for the questions. The agreement does have an infant industry protection clause, which is available to countries to invoke Of course, there's some criteria that you have to meet, or that particular industry has to meet, but the provision is there, and there's a time frame for infant industry protection under that particular provision. We also have rules for protection against anti-dumping, for protection against import surges, and for protection against goods that are subsidized. All of these various safeguards are very, very important to protect the domestic industry. I think what is also important in this, as we're talking about protection of industries, is the rules of origin. We will have to make sure that we aggressively implement our rules of origin so that we prevent transshipment of goods from other parts of the world into the AfCFTA market. Or indeed, we will have to make sure that the rules of origin protect within the AfCFTA from a country A exporting goods to country B that actually do not qualify for preferences to get into the market of country B within the AfCFTA context. These things will require that, as I said earlier, that we work closely with our customs authorities who are in the front line of implementation of the agreement from customs procedures point of view. But certainly, we want to make sure that this agreement does not create job losses by decimating infant industries. We have the experience of that in some countries on the African continent where infant industries were decimated. We are also working very, very closely with development finance institutions to make on the African continent to make sure that where countries are reducing and eliminating tariffs, and if a particular sector suffers injury, that sector is there's an intervention, and that sector is assisted by way of access to finance capacity. The second question from His Excellency the Ambassador of Ethiopia, I think that the ambassadors of African countries and the Africa Group is really at the coalface of interface with investors. Investors are very, very important, obviously, to Africa's economy. You will know that since the onset of COVID-19, foreign direct investment into the African continent declined by over 50%. And the likelihood of that quickly rebounding, nobody knows, no one can project how quickly we can get back to the pre-COVID-19 FDI flows. And so ambassadors are very, very important for facilitating investment, particularly now that we have a continental agreement. They are very, very important and very, very fast growing dynamic sectors. Financial services is one of them, where there's opportunity to invest in financial technology. Manufacturing is another important area. Agro-processing. There are a range of different automobiles, the auto sector, pharmaceuticals. There are a range of different sectors that are now open for investment under the rules of the agreement. Soon, Africa, many countries in Africa will be positioning themselves for generic drug industry production, production of vaccines. In 2019, Africa imported over $15 billion worth of pharmaceutical products. It is possible to manufacture those pharmaceutical products here on the African continent. And so from an investment attractive point of view, I think that we will be relying very much on yourselves, Your Excellencies, to facilitate this investment with the international investor community so that we create jobs on the African continent, so that we contribute to industrialization of the African continent, and we create jobs for young people on the African continent. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wamkili. Colleagues, we still have 10 minutes. Do you have any other comments, please?
Ask a question? Sorry.
Yes. Go ahead.
Sorry, Your Excellency. I just wondered if I could ask a question.
Yeah, of course.
What
Go
are
ahead,
the
Duncan.
rules given that I have DFAT on this call, along with Austrade, etc., what are the rules for economic engagement for other countries, such as Australia?
Another question, please, before giving back the floor to the Secretary General. Yes. Joseph, you have the floor. Joseph, did you ask for the floor?
Yes.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you very much. I wish to express appreciation to all parties for making this virtual meeting possible, despite the time zone differences that we all have. So, Your Excellencies, thank you all very much. Ghana truly welcomes all African countries to the headquarters of the African Continental Free Trade Area located in Accra. We also thank all African countries for the massive support which has made it possible for Ghana to host the Continental Union. The African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement definitely represents a major opportunity for countries to boost growth, reduce poverty, and broaden economic inclusion. Its implementation has so many advantages. First, it's a small body. Let me put it this way, a baby virtually. But then, if we are able to implement the resolutions of the AfCFTA, it will definitely lift close to 30 million Africans out of extreme poverty and boost incomes of nearly 68 million others who live on less than $5.5 a day. It will also increase African exports by close to 560 billion, mostly in manufacturing. It will also boost wages for both skilled and unskilled workers. $10.3% for unskilled workers, and then 9.8% for skilled workers. The extreme poverty will also decline across the continent, with the biggest improvements in countries which can currently have high poverty rates. So definitely, the coming into force of this agreement will actually broaden opportunities for all African countries. I want to thank the Chief Executive for his time, himself and his other collaborators. I want to also express appreciation to the CEO of the Australia-Africa Chamber of Commerce, DFAT also, and to all who have made this evening's program a success. So thank you very much. Mine is actually a compliment. We thank everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Mr. Wamkili, the floor is yours, I think, to respond to Mr. Duncan, and to Joe.
I had my hand up earlier on, Dean.
Okay.
If you want, maybe you may wish him to.
Yes, yes, yes. Go ahead. Go ahead, Joe.
Thank you very much.
Yes, go ahead.
Mr. Wanked, I join colleagues in expressing our gratitude for your having found time from a busy schedule to come and interact with us here. I also thank Mr. Harris, who has come up with a team from his quota in terms of interface with and interaction with the African countries. I have to congratulate you, Mr. Mene, for acknowledging that this is going to be an arduous task, a very long road that we're going to travel, but nonetheless one that we are prepared to explore, because doing nothing is not an option. I want to relate myself to two issues that you have raised in your presentation, a presentation for which I sincerely thank you for the information shared. The first issue that I have to raise is concerning the value chains. You will have noted an issue raised also by the ambassador for Botswana, Ambassador Lucas Makhatro, who's inquired on the issue of, infant industries. Now, I want to know, when it comes to these value chains, whether you have factored the need to also make sure there's a select for those that may be marginalized. It will be common, expectation that the most attractive of those few value chains that you said that there are few target value chains, that the interest will be more to do with the ones that can be forged on a large scale, and on a large scale, normally it will be by those that are resource endowed. So probably you already have a program for ensuring that in some of these value chains, those countries that ordinarily would not have the capacity to do business on a large scale are also taken on board. Now, the second issue relates to the rules of origin that you've made. Well, still on that issue of the value chains, would you be able to indicate which ones you think would be of interest to investors in Australia? I'm sure they are listening. They're also wondering now, these target value chains, which are they, and what is it that they should roll out to their constituencies here in Australia? So you probably want to, just highlight the ones that are already on the cards. Then on the rules of origins, yes, we note that, they will obviously open opportunities for exporters of goods within the free trade area. I have noted what you said, that the local content requirements are very stringent. You probably want to assist us as your ambassadors here, how we're going to unpackage that, aspect of the rules of origin to would-be exporters into our continent from Australia. What does that mean when the rules of origin are stringent, and where are the opportunities for them? Of course, the general opportunity lies in that, you relocate your production, you set up plant in Africa and then enjoy the large scale market. But for those who have probably their raw materials located in Australia, and they have certain advantages in exporting as opposed to actually setting up shop in Africa. How will they maneuver the stringent rules of origin, or where are the opportunities? I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wamkili. If you allow me to take another one, I think Mr. Halliday asked for the floor. If we can, it will be, I think, our last one. Thank you.
I did. Thank you very much. It was probably more a comment, but I'd just like to thank you and Duncan for organising today's event. I found it very informative, and I'd just like to congratulate the Secretary General for his comments. And probably just to echo a little bit, it's not so much a question, but just a comment in respect of, I would say that the cultural literacy of many Australians in Africa is pretty low. Apart from engineering and mining and support services, where we have over 150 companies, mining companies and support services, another 150, there's not a lot of trade and investment in Africa. And I think a lot of it is to do with the lack of cultural understanding, cultural literacy in Africa. And just to echo what the Secretary General talked about, I think it's incumbent upon us all to start talking about the AfCFTA, because I think it's really going to open people's eyes up about where the African continent wants to go. And I'd just like to congratulate everybody involved, because I think it is going to be quite a fundamental change in promoting that Africa's open for business. And yes, I know it's going to take some time, but I think it's absolutely in the right direction. And I know from a trade perspective, impediments across country borders are quite difficult. And for an Australian exporter, say in food, it's very difficult to get a full appreciation of all the tariffs and non-tariff barriers that they have to deal with if they want to go into multiple countries. So I do applaud the activity that's gone behind the AfCFTA, but I think it is incumbent, if the question is about what we can all do in this regard, I think continuing to have these sorts of conversations with the Australian investment and exporter community and education providers, I think is going to be critically important, both now and well into the future, if Australia and Africa are really going to make the most of this particular agreement. So well done so far, but we've still got quite a way to go and a lot of work to be done. But certainly I applaud the efforts that have been undertaken to date. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Ian Halliday. And now I'm giving the floor to Mr. Wamkili. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I think the question of the first question on economic engagement for Australia, the rules is similar to what His Excellency Ambassador Mhishi asked, at least the last point. We are not yet a customs union. We are a free trade area. There will be, for third parties, what we call MFN rules. So global rules of trade will apply between an African country and Australia, because we are not a customs union. So WTO rules will continue to apply. If you have between country A and Australia a free trade area, then of course the rules of that free trade area shall apply to regulate the trade. But what we have designed in the AfCFTA is an agreement that seeks to foster industrialization and localization in the AfCFTA market. So we look at the AfCFTA market as one big market of 1.2 billion people. The reason I said that the rules of origin are quite stringent is because the value addition threshold is very high in order to meet the criteria for rules of origin. It is a minimum of 40% on average. On some products, it's a little bit higher, but on average, our rules of origin, the threshold for value addition is 40%. And so to the extent that an Australian company or an investor wishes to enjoy the preferences that the agreement provides, we encourage that investor or manufacturer to establish in one of the AfCFTA countries so that you can have access to this market of 1.2 billion people. That's the best way to enjoy the fullest benefits that the agreement has to offer. Establish a commercial presence in one of the countries of the AfCFTA, then you will, and you meet the rules of origin, you will have access to the entire continent, and you will not be treated as a third party investor if you are able to do so. The rules of origin for the area of trade in services, similarly, will, if there's a board of directors for an African company, the majority of directors will be from African countries. as well as other criteria in the area of trade and services. So that's the engagement for the rules of engagement for Australian investors or companies. I totally share His Excellency the High Commissioner of Ghana to Australia, the projections that that he made, the potential for this agreement. The World Bank had very, very similar projections about the possibilities that this agreement creates. Where we implement it effectively, we have the potential to lift a total of 100 million Africans out of poverty, and the potential to position Africa as regionally competitive and globally competitive in 30 to 40 years' time. The World Bank didn't say in 30 to 40 years' time. I'm the one who's adding that time frame, because industrialization, it takes time. It's not a pill that you swallow the next day you've industrialized. It is going to take us many, many years, and we have to appreciate that. The opportunity for intra-Africa exports, for trade specialization intra-Africa, for beneficiation is absolutely important. What we have done in the agreement, we have imposed export taxes, or rather we have introduced an enabling provision for export taxes, particularly for minerals, so that if you say that in my country, in my region, we want beneficiation of minerals on the African continent, processing of minerals on the African continent, the agreement allows you to do that, because we want to foster industrialization on the African continent. The value chains that we are going to focus on will really depend, they will be an outcome of a robust discussion, which is going to happen in the next few months. What I mentioned are value chains that already certain regions, some regions on the African continent are focusing on. Agro-processing, and we know that agro-processing is a very, very big contributor to industrialization. Agro-processing is very, very important. It enables us to do a number of things to address the food security question. It also enables us to advance on the value chain by creating industrialization of our agricultural products. My suspicion is where we will land on this is automobiles, agro-processing, pharmaceuticals, perhaps one more value chain that maybe minerals beneficiation as a start. And then, of course, we will look at other sectors as we proceed. But certainly in the next few months, this is a conversation that, that African ministers of trade are going to have. We will establish an industrial development forum that will identify value chains, that will identify an industrial development action plan, so that we not just talk about Africa's industrialization, but we have an action plan over the next 4 to 5 years that will be measurable, so that we're able to see the areas of weakness that we have to focus on. It is entirely true, Ambassador, that some countries are more well endowed than others in terms of natural resources. And that is why it is very, very important that as we consider our import and export profile, we also think about the countries who may not have the natural resources to launch their industrialization path. But in that respect, if I can give you an example, when we negotiated almost 20 years ago now, the SADC trade protocol, if you take Lesotho, for example, Lesotho was not as competitive as other countries in the region, but today, as a result of the SADC trade protocol, Lesotho is one of the most competitive countries in textiles and clothing in SADC. And Lesotho is part of the value chain of exports, automobiles that are going to the European Union under the Economic Partnership Agreement, the leather seats, the seat belts. Lesotho is part of that value chain, and other countries also in the region. So, but 20 years ago, probably Lesotho was not in the same strength of competitiveness. But these trade agreements have enabled Lesotho to be very competitive on textiles and clothing. And I would dare say that today Lesotho is more competitive on textiles and clothing than South Africa. So you can see what happens if you focus on a creation of value chains, even for countries that today may not have the industrial capacity. But if you are disciplined enough, in 15, 20 years' time, you focus on a niche sector, you can succeed in developing competitiveness in that particular area, in that particular value chain. My apologies. East African community, the success story of Uganda vis-a-vis the other vis-a-vis Kenya. The former Minister of Trade of Uganda told me that when we negotiated the East African community, we were very much afraid of Kenya being swamped by products from Kenya. But today, Uganda was able to find value chains that they are able to export to the Kenyan market, including agricultural products and agro-processing products. So I think it takes disciplined identification of value chains, and you sustain over time implementation of your industrial action plan for that particular sector. And I think that's what we need on a continental scale, so that we make the space. Countries that have reached a relatively higher level of industrialization, they can create a space in the value chain for other countries to take up that space. I can tell you a conversation that I had with the former Minister of Trade of South Africa. He said to me, we are prepared, and we were prepared to step out of some value chains where even smaller countries were more competitive in those value chains than South Africa. Because these industries in South Africa were sunset industries, were not competitive. And so we need to make space and make space for other countries in the region. So I think that's the spirit with which to approach this. My sense, Your Excellency, would be that where investors are looking is in the services sector, financial services. These are critical for financial inclusion, for supporting Africa's industrialization, investing in financial technology as we liberalize as a continent, as we liberalize our trade in these sectors of critical importance. I mentioned pharmaceutical industry, agro-processing, the automobile sector. These are these are drivers of Africa's industrializations, and more importantly, these are drivers of job creation on the African continent. Once the Industrial Development Forum of the Council of Ministers of the AfCFTA have met, and they have approved value chains for investment, what I will be saying will no longer be speculative. It will be definitive that these are the sectors that we will be focusing on to drive Africa's industrialization and growth on the African continent. The last point that was made by Mr. Halliday, yes, I think we need a lot more conversation and a better understanding mutually between Australia and countries on the African continent, so that there can be a better understanding of the opportunities that the AfCFTA presents for investors and for exporters. Absolutely, it is a very, very unique opportunity that that we have. And yes, I absolutely agree with you that it's going to be very, very difficult to implement a trade agreement of countries that are so different. But I am very, very confident that we will succeed over time. It's not going to be overnight. We will succeed over time. So thank you very much again, Ambassador, for the opportunity. And I look forward to more engagements and regular updates so that we update you, ambassadors, about the progress that we are making, and where we have challenges. We will be very frank and admit that we are having specific challenges in certain areas. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Secretary General Soam Kilimini, for this amazing interaction that we succeed to have tonight. I would like, before concluding, to thank sincerely Mr. Duncan Harris and our colleague Joseph and or our colleague present tonight. I would like to thank DFAT, David. Thank you so much to be with us this evening. That indeed, I think the journey had just started. And the AfCFTA will be the catalyst of the Made in Africa for the next years. And hopefully this meeting will help us to understand a little bit more, especially our partners from Australia, the importance of this platform. We should, I think, ask ourselves how at our level and as the group of African diplomats, we can drive the strategic agenda of accelerating intra-Africa trade and boosting Africa's trading position in the global market and in Australia in particular. Our meeting this evening should serve as an eye-opener for us to come up with concrete steps toward the full realization of the vision of the AfCFTA. I think during our next meeting as head of missions, let us discuss and come up with ideas on the role of our group. And hopefully we will have, when the circumstances will permit it, we will be so pleased to have Mr. Wamkili, our guest in Australia. We will be so pleased to have you here. Otherwise, we will come to Ghana and we will have one meeting. But thanks to the ITs today, we can at least have this interaction by video conference. Thank you, all of you, for being with us tonight. And again, please applause for our Secretary General.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Your Excellency. I certainly would love for the Africa Group to bring investors, to come with investors to Accra. We have a business forum that is coming up in the next few months. We will let you know when the date is finalized, but it will be towards the end of the year. Hopefully, the COVID situation will have subsided, but certainly we will keep you updated about that business forum. I am happy to come to Australia, but I will only come after South Africa beats Australia in cricket. Before then, I will not come. I will come only after we beat Australia in cricket. But thank you very much, Your Excellency.
Thank you so much. Have a nice day. And
yes,
thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.